It's been 2 years since I first landed in Portugal, and these are still the biggest culture shocks that I have not come to terms with. In this video, I'm going to discuss the real culture shocks of living in Portugal, not just the surface ones. Some of these things drive me absolutely freaking crazy living in Portugal, and I'm certainly not the only one. Now, before you go and criticize me that I'm just some blathering American that has no idea what he's talking about, most of these came from conversations that I had with my Portuguese friends that lived in the United States, Canada, and/or Mexico. And if you watch my channel, you know how much I love Portugal, and I mean no disrespect to the Portuguese.
I said Portuguese, not Portuguese.
This is some guy named Dave in Portugal, and if you're interested in all things Portugal related or Europe, make sure to hit the like and subscribe button because I'll be posting videos like this every single week on this channel. Now let's get straight into it. Now in Portugal, it's very important to understand the hierarchy of respect. This should be the case everywhere, but Portugal has very strong Catholic ideals, and moms and grandmas reign supreme and are treated with the utmost respect. These are the señoras, and you better start your sentence with a señora when addressing them. They are the neighborhood watch, and nothing goes down without them seeing. They are also the breaking news that will break it faster than Google on your smartphone. And if you are at the grocery store, it is literally the law to let them or any elderly person go in front of you. But if you're a decent person, you probably did this in the United States anyway. And if you're not, you're a ding dong. Now, if you come from the United States, especially a major city, then it may come as a culture shock on just how safe Portugal really is. It took me a while to get used to walking through the dark and dingy alleyways in Lisbon and Porto, but these often harbor some of the best bars and restaurants and are most of the time completely safe. You see, violent crimes are relatively low in Portugal, and the crimes that are more common in Portugal are more petty crimes like pickpocketing, which is definitely no fun if you get your passport and money stolen. But it is certainly not as common in Portugal as it is in cities like Madrid or Barcelona in Spain. It's very nice to not have to worry about a lot of these things like you do in the United States. And you certainly don't have to worry about getting shot in Portugal. Now, there are guns in Portugal, but most of these guns are owned by people in the rural countryside who go boar hunting. What you do have to look out for are the people selling drugs to you on the streets, because usually they're not drugs. Now let me start by saying that I absolutely love Portuguese food. The seafood is unbeatable, and I've even had some of the best steak dinners in my life, which I was not expecting. In fact, the other day I was talking to an owner of a Chinese restaurant, and he told me when they first had opened that he had done really authentic, amazing Chinese food, but he only had customers that were from China. So he was forced to change his cuisine to a more adaptable Portuguese cuisine so that he could have regular Portuguese customers. And a lot of the Asian restaurants in Portugal kind of have this big Oriental blanket. And I don't mean to say that as a generalization because that's usually what these restaurants are called. These restaurants oftentimes have sushi and Chinese food and Korean food all mixed into one general restaurant, which can come as a huge culture shock if you're from a place like New York City, Los Angeles, San Francisco, or Seattle. And one of the cuisines I miss so much is Vietnamese food, which is very uncommon here in Portugal. Now, of course, I didn't come to Portugal to have Mexican food, but man, do I miss it. The only thing you can really get for the most part here in Portugal is Tex-Mex. And if you're from a place like California or Nevada, you know that Tex-Mex ain't the real deal. I want that Guadalajara adobada, primo. Now, I don't want to sound like a broken record here because I do talk about this a lot in my videos. But this is one culture shock that really grinds my gears. I can't tell you how many professional companies have come to my house assessed the job thoroughly, taken measurements, told me how easy it was going to be, only to never hear from them again. Even after multiple follow-ups, absolute crickets. At first, I wanted to believe that occasionally this is just something that happens, just like it does in the United States. But then it kept happening, over and over and over again. And I would come to realize now that this is something very common. Now, I am in no way saying that there aren't exceptional Portuguese companies and businesses, because there certainly are. But if you find one that goes above and beyond and does an incredible job, never let them go and cherish them. Companies and professionals in Portugal just don't seem to have the same punctuality and management that you find on average in the United States. And at first I thought maybe this was because I was just a foreigner and they didn't want to bother. But come to find out, this happens to my Portuguese friends and family, and it's also something I hear being complained about at cafes very frequently. When I was researching before my move to Portugal, I scoured the internet for the best prices on flights and accommodations. And whether you're looking to move long-term or just visit, traveling around Portugal and Europe is hard to beat in terms of affordability. But every so often, I'd board a flight and see those spacious business class seats. Or I'd see one of those beautiful penthouse flats in Lisbon, and I couldn't help but think to myself, wouldn't it be so nice to take the luxury option for once? Today's sponsor, Masterworks, is giving you the chance to do just that, while potentially making your money work for you. Masterworks is giving you access that 98% of the ultra-rich invest 5% of their portfolios in. It's museum-grade fine art. And I know what you're thinking, there's no way I could afford that. But that's what makes Masterworks so genius. Masterworks is offering you the chance to invest in offerings from legendary artists like Picasso, Banksy, and Basquiat, without needing to spend millions. And what I like about them to date is that they've already delivered real results. They're up to 16 exits now, with every single one of them returning a net profit to their investors. They've acquired over 300 paintings with over $800 million in acquired assets under management. They've paid out over $45 million in returns to users just like you and me. With over 800,000 users online, they've had to make a wait list because some offerings sold out in just minutes. But my subscribers now have access to skip that line by clicking the link in the description. There are many places that don't have elevators or access to the upper levels of the building. And this is a stark contrast to the United States, where there is accessibility to people who have disabilities almost everywhere. I mean, I think this is a real problem in Lisbon because I don't remember seeing anybody in a wheelchair ever in Lisbon, which is crazy to me. In the newer buildings in Portugal, I have seen elevators and access, but most of the Airbnbs and buildings I've been through, you have to take the stairs. You have to carry all of your luggage up the stairs, and this will drive some Americans absolutely nuts. Now, this is one where I do think the United States wins in terms of engineering, and that is in a lot of the toilet bowls that I see here in Portugal. A lot of the times when you go to use the restroom in Portugal, the toilet hole is in the front of the toilet, meaning that when you do a number two, it just kind of sits on the porcelain for you to look at. And when you go to flush the toilet, there is usually always a little bit left behind. And almost every single time, you have to use the toilet brush to scrub it off. Now, this is where I wonder, how hard is it just to make a toilet where the hole is right underneath you so that it drops into the water? I have heard that people in the UK and different parts of Netherlands and Europe like to examine and observe their poop. I'm not one of those people. I like to put it in the water, flush it down, and act like it never came from me. What can I say? I'm a big fan of toilets, everyone. And one of my favorite things about the toilets here, if they have them, are bidets. Usually the bidets are next to the toilet, and I think this is one of the best creations ever. It's why Japan is one of my favorite countries in the world. I mean, it's just nice to know that a whole culture and society is walking around with very clean bum bums. But speaking of going to the bathroom, this one is not about number 2, but number 1. In Portugal, you will see men peeing almost everywhere. I mean, I have seen workers in mid-daylight peeing on the side of an exit so that everyone driving by, their families, their kids, can pretty much see everything. And this happens in big cities like Lisbon and Porto. There is something about the culture here that when you gotta go, you just go. Whereas the people in the United States know that this is a good way to get yourself locked up in jail for indecent exposure. Now, the general cost of living in Portugal from the United States is 40 to 50% less than living in Portugal. However, in the last couple years, Lisbon has climbed its way to one of the most expensive cities to rent in all of Europe. But important things like healthcare, car insurance, and groceries are much more affordable than they are in the United States. However, there are some things that are much more expensive in Portugal. In Portugal, the markups on computers and Apple products like iPhones are insane. For instance, the iPhone Pro has a base price of $999 in the United States. And in Portugal, the same phone has a base price of a whopping 1,349 euros. And when converted to dollars at the time of making this video, that's equal to $1,443. That's $444 more for the exact same phone. Say what? Now, this makes sense because the United States is a next best thing type culture. Things like having the next iPhone and the best computer and the best technology is more important than having affordable food to eat. In Portugal, people have things for a long time. For instance, you see a lot of 30-year-old cars driving around the streets in relatively good condition, and you don't see a lot of the beaters that you do in the United States, with duct tape holding on their Honda bumper. But speaking of cars, this is another thing that is much more expensive in Portugal than the United States. Sit back and get ready for this one, because when it comes to cars, United States and Portugal couldn't be more opposite. First, let's compare apples to apples. We're going to compare the Volkswagen Tiguan because this is a car that's very accessible in both countries. In the United States, the Tiguan has a base price of $30,871. But in Portugal, this same car has a base price of 37,257 euros, which at the time of making this video converted to $39,858. That's $9,000 more in Portugal than the United States, and it's probably a frickin' manual shift gear. However, one thing that is important to note is that in Portugal, this price includes the tax price. Whereas in the United States, the tax price is usually added once you're buying the car. I'm sure everyone has had this gulp moment in the United States when they see the tax added to a big price like a car. And in regards to cars in Portugal, one of the biggest shocks is the size of the cars. In United States, it's very common to see massive trucks like the Ford F-150,
The 250, the 350.
But in Portugal, one of the biggest Ford trucks that you can even buy is the Ford Ranger Raptor. So if you're into big old lifted trucks compensating for something God didn't gift you with, then Portugal might not be for you. Now, let's move on to driving cars in general. Now, I have certainly gotten a lot better at driving in Portugal than I was when I arrived. First one is how fast people drive on rural roads in Portugal. Now, just a couple weeks ago, a person was hit on a motorbike driving through a rural village in Portugal. And I hope that the person is okay, but judging how the people were standing over him, I don't think so. In my opinion, it's way too common for people to drive on the rural roads in Portugal like there's no one else on the road. I don't care how nice of a car you have and how good of brakes or cornering technology. Coming around a blind corner where there could be an old lady or a kid doesn't make you a good driver, it makes you reckless. And this seems to happen way too often in Portugal and is one of the biggest complaints I hear from the Portuguese themselves. Now, I'd love to pretend that this doesn't happen, but on my street alone, I have seen dead animals, I have been run off the road, and a couple of months ago, someone crashed into my neighbor's house. So it's definitely a lot for the short time that I've been in Portugal. And if you think the driving is crazy in Portugal, wait till you see the parking. People in Portugal often park wherever they want, on top of sidewalks, on the side of roads where you can barely get through, pretty much anywhere where they can fit their car. Sometimes people will completely block you in, and there's kind of a Portuguese code where if there's a car blocking you, all you have to do is honk your horn and somebody will come out of a magical apartment or from a restaurant because they are waiting for their car to get alerted to move it. Towing a car in Portugal is much less common than it is in the United States. Now, it will definitely happen if you are blocking a business or it is an emergency, of course. Gasoline is extremely expensive in Portugal, more than any place in the United States. Right now, the equivalent to a gallon of gas is $8.50 in Portugal. For all you people living in Texas or Arizona, that one hurts, doesn't it? Now, I probably sound like a broken record talking about the slow pace of life, but this is certainly one that I have still not completely gotten used to. In Portugal, it definitely feels sometimes like things can take
forever.
The first example that popped into my head is standing at the grocery store. Continente is a very popular one here in Portugal. And I'm standing there in a very, very, very long line, and there's only one cashier checking people out. And then about 15 minutes later, she calls for someone to come help her. And then that person comes walking up at the slowest possible speed to help her colleague. But only one colleague comes when they probably should have 3 or 4. And by the time you get to the cashier register, it's very common to have an old lady talking about the weather or complaining about the rising prices for the next 10 to 15 minutes. Welcome to Portugal, people, and if you come to live or visit here, this is just something you're gonna have to get used to. As you've probably heard everyone else saying, if you don't learn patience, you'll probably die of a cortisol-induced heart attack. This is probably the biggest cultural difference between the United States and Portugal, and that is the importance of spending time with your family. In Portugal, it was shocking to me at first how much of a priority people make spending time with their family. Now, these people could be tired from working a full-time job or taking care of kids or having a long day, but they always cut out time to be with their family. And I just think this is so beautiful. It's such a contrast coming from a culture like the United States where individualism is so much more common these days. And I just love the fact that people make family and community such a priority here in Portugal. In Portugal, it's very common to have a light breakfast, a massive lunch in between the times of 1 to 3 p.m., and then not eat dinner until 8 or 9 p.m. In fact, you will find many Americans running around like chickens with their heads cut off, looking for a nice restaurant between the hours of 3 to 7 p.m. It's very common for me to intermittent fast in the morning and not eat lunch until maybe 2 or 3 p.m. But when I first came to Portugal, I was frantically looking for a restaurant and everything was closed. But if it's an emergency and you need to get some food in your system because your blood sugar is low or you are just very hangry, many of the cafes and snack bars in Portugal are open in these hours. Now, you won't be able to usually get a full meal, but you can have some snacks like some croquettes or some pastel de nata to get you going. And I'm going to add one more as a bonus, and that is tipping culture. Now, in Portugal, most of the Portuguese friends and family that I have hardly ever tip. Now, that doesn't mean that if you think the server went above and beyond that you shouldn't give them a couple euros at the end of the meal. But the tipping culture in Portugal is much different, and Portuguese people don't want Americans coming to Portugal and changing that because they simply can't afford it. The United States is one of the only countries where tipping has gotten so out of control. And here in Europe, it just doesn't happen for the most part because most servers are typically paid a better wage than they are in the US. Obviously, that is different in Portugal because the wages are so low. However, it's very important for you to think about how you are affecting the culture. But in a lot of the more touristy areas like the Algarve, tipping has now become expected because so many Americans are doing it. Stop doing it, stop tipping. It's just not what people do here. And just do what the Romans do when in Rome, okay? Whew. Okay, now that that's over, I just wanna say that experiencing culture shock is completely normal, and it's a beautiful thing to experience brand new things. It's an opportunity to learn and adapt to new customs and new perspectives, which can ultimately enrich your experience in Portugal. If you want to see more content about Portugal, make sure to hit the like and subscribe button because I will be posting videos like this every single week on this channel. This is some guy named Dave in Portugal, and we'll see you next time.